What's up, and welcome back to my channel, where today it is time to serve up the long-awaited Surviving Darius Crooks series, where I take you on an intimate journey through the life of the man behind the mask of an innocent social media personality, from his early life through his most recent scam and crimes. So over the foreseeable future, I will be serving up courses of videos that will pretty much put together all the pieces of this elaborate web of sociopathic lies and deceit. Yes, so consider this the first video in our book of Darius Crooks, Chapter 1. Darius Crooks was born Darius Travoy Williams on December 29th of 1981 in Chicago, Illinois, which, if you follow the zodiac signs like me, means that he is ambitious, sensitive, disciplined, as well as his negative traits, which I personally experienced, which was being stubborn and a know-it-all, which you can still see today if you watch any of his Instagram live videos. Now, the stories of Darius's early years have really only been told by him, although I have met his cousins, his mom, his younger siblings, and pretty much anyone who was close to Darius during our time together. Looking back, I really can't say that I ever heard any significant childhood stories from any of them regarding Darius. And although his mom seemed nice enough from the few times that I did interact with her, I can't say that we really ever sat down and had any deep conversations in regards to Darius or anything. So until we're able to find out otherwise, we're just gonna go with the consistent parts of the stories that he's told over time. To me personally, those things he shared on his IG Live, there's definitely some conflicting stories, definitely, but there are some pieces that are cohesive and consistent. And so pretty much we're just gonna go based on that until we're able to fill in the gaps of the things that, you know, seem a little shaky, which there are a lot of those too. Darius was an only child born to his mom, who was a single parent. However, his dad was not a consistent and present force in his life. He's definitely spoke of multiple times, even with me years ago, of one occasion where his father was supposed to pick him up to take him out somewhere and spend time with him. And his father, he said, he sat in the window watching cars go by, and the father never showed up. He said Darius was blowing up his phone, calling him, leaving messages, etc. And the father never showed up. And obviously that really impacted Darius, like it has many people who have had those sort of experiences in their life. And for what it's worth, I definitely believe this story because it has not changed in the 20 years that I've known Darius. And unfortunately, I think some of this trauma began to create the predator that we are now seeing today. I really think that these sort of things, and we'll get into more, really began to create the person that we see today, those of us who know him for real, outside of online. Because it kills me that people online think they know him better than people who know him in real life. But Darius did also have a few half siblings on his father's side. And from what I can remember, Darius pretty much described his father as a rolling stone. He had multiple baby moms, and he was kind of a street dude for the most part. Now, from what I can recall from the time that I knew Darius, he didn't have any significant relationship with any of his half siblings. However, I vaguely do remember him reconnecting with a sister. However, from what I recall, it didn't last long at all. Now, one relationship that Darius consistently speaks fond of is his relationship with his grandmother, Pam. From Darius's accounts, he was very close to his grandmother, and she was the inspiration for his interest in the culinary arts. Darius spent a lot of time with his grandmother at points in his life, which cultivated their bond even more. However, unfortunately, in his adolescence, his grandmother passed away. And once she passed away, it was then just Darius and his mom, which at the time he told me he and his mom were very close, with him being the only child. But that only lasted until his mom met what became his stepfather at a grocery store one day. From Darius's account, it's pretty much like the mom met the stepfather at the grocery store, pretty much brought him home, and the guy moved in like immediately. And Darius has always described this as the moment where things started to change with his relationship with his mom and his life in general. Darius has given many accounts to me personally, other friends, as well as on his IG Lives, that his stepfather was very abusive emotionally, physically, and the stepfather was also homophobic. Darius speaks to some of the strain of his relationship with his mom being in connection with the fact that she did not protect him from this guy who came in the household and treated him really bad. Darius also tells the story of the time where his stepfather attacked him for one day wearing a pair of new gym shoes that his birth father had purchased for him. The stepfather told him not to wear the shoes. Darius went to his mom, and the mom said that he could wear the shoes. Darius wore the shoes to school, and when he returned home, the stepfather immediately noticed that he had on the new shoes that he told him not to wear. And when Darius said, well, my mom said that I could wear it, the stepfather went into a rage and threw a high heel shoe at him, which hit him in his eye and put a gash right above his eye, which you can see to this day. Now, that story is pretty much the same version that I heard. I thought it was a different item years ago, but that could be just my memory because it's been so long. But you can definitely see the gash above his eye. And Darius has told that story to myself and many others, once again, including the IG Lives, where he tells everything. Now, from his account, when the stepfather threw the high heel shoe at him and he was bleeding, his mom just yelled to the stepfather, calling his name, and then took Darius to the bathroom and started to patch up his eye, but never did anything to his stepfather for doing that. Now, I'm a little foggy on the timeline and still trying to put together pieces of a lot of what's going on here. However, what I do know is that at some point, the stepfather did kick Darius out of their home. Darius's account is that the stepfather basically kicked him out because he was gay. However, at some point, the stepfather did put Darius out of the home in his teen years, and Darius ended up being homeless for a couple weeks. Now, I've always believed that story because of the fact that it has been consistent since the first time Darius told it to me nearly 20 years ago. And even when he tells the story today, those pieces never really change. However, and not victim blaming at all, because I definitely do not advocate abuse on any level, which is the reason why I'm speaking up about what Darius is doing to people now, the predatory abuse. But now I do put into question Darius's complete version of why he may have gotten put out of his parents' home, because of the fact that I'm now seeing a cycle of Darius's version of stories always putting him in a victim position. And now knowing all of the schemes and crimes that have been committed over the years, and being able to look back even to when I knew him, now knowing things were happening that I was not privy to or aware of, and I met him at a fairly young age, makes me now say, were you doing some of those things when you were with your parents in their home? Were they your victim in some way? And was that the reason you got kicked out? Because it takes a lot for a parent, and even the mom backing that up. Generally, you know, it takes a lot for a parent to put their own child out of the home. And yes, people do get put out for being gay. However, they also get put out when the parent feels that they can't trust them because they're stealing from them or committing crimes in their homes. So I don't know, speculation, allegedly, all that good stuff, just based on what I'm learning and how many pieces of his life are coming to light, and it's showing that he's not who I thought he was or who he even presented himself to be at certain points in life. So I don't know, just a theory. We may find out. The only person that would really be able to help clear this up is his mother. Maybe she'll talk. Maybe she won't. We don't know. Nevertheless, at some point, his mom does marry his stepfather, and then she has his two younger siblings with the stepfather, which was his brother and his sister. And again, this is an area where I'm a little foggy on timelines, but if I remember correctly, his siblings are definitely much younger, maybe 10 years or so younger than he is. And I know as of today, they don't really have a relationship, but even back in the day when Darius and I were together and they were much younger, 5, 6-year-olds or whatever they were, even then, Darius had a very shaky relationship with his siblings. I recall at times he would try to be the big brother. He would have them over for sleepovers, take them places, etc. And other times he would have various issues with them, even when they were children. And I can't really recall what those issues were now, but it was things that I do recall being like, you know, we can kind of push through those things. They are your siblings. But he didn't. And I have definitely heard accounts as of recent with me learning what's happening present day in regards to him. I've definitely been hearing accounts of how Darius has gone on his social media platforms in front of tens of thousands of people and told his sister's business of having a miscarriage and basically just criticizing his siblings on a public platform, which isn't cool at all. So why him being able to expose the sensitivity of his sister having a miscarriage at a young age with his D-wives is amazing to me. How they let those sort of things slide and don't hold him accountable for not having tact or sensitivity or empathy during those times, because I'm sure many of them would not want him blasting that sort of information about them in front of, tens of thousands of people. But, he's perfect in their eyes. And then on second thought, I'm really not surprised when it comes to the D-wives and what they believe and allow to happen and fall for. And that's a whole nother video that is definitely coming, because that's a whole nother monster in and of itself, and the love bombing and all of those things. That's a psychological video that I feel is very important, so that some people can start to notice the signs of manipulation and how it occurs even in a public platform, because it's very, very, very interesting. There's a lot of, layers to this situation here. But let's get back into his early life. So after being kicked out of his family home and becoming homeless, Darius ends up being taken in by Miss Tillery, who was a nice lady from his church who happened to notice that something was up with Darius and he seemed to not have a place to go. And so she could see that he was hurting and in need, and she told him, after church, you come to my home. And she took him in at that point and even gave him his own bedroom in her home. And this is the same lady that last year on his social media platform, he posted when he purchased her a new car.
Merry Christmas.
You lying, Darius.
I'm not.
Oh my gosh,
Now, one of the other inconsistent stories that I've heard people questioning is Darius's claims that he was in foster care, which when I first heard it sounded extremely foreign to me, because I had never ever heard him mention anything about foster care. And from every account that I knew and the people around me knew, he went from being at his mom's house to being with Miss Tillery, being taken in. And that was not a foster care situation. These were people who took him in basically to get him through his last year or so of high school. And so I did actually question people who I still know, who we both know in common, to try to get clarity and just see, like, was I out of the loop on that? Which I doubt it, but he was not officially in foster care. And I think he may have taken that liberty of calling it a foster care situation, or that he was in foster care, to gain more sympathy, which is his MO in general. Like, there are many, many other occasions where we see him, make overstatements or even just make up things in order to garner some sympathy from his followers. It is what it is. That's what he does. Now, Darius was definitely what we would call a church boy, and his roots were definitely, as a child, deeply embedded in the missionary Baptist church world, which actually runs through his veins so deeply that he was actually able to get away for many years with the lie that he had actually graduated with a degree in biblical studies from the Moody Bible Institute. And he was able to get away with the lie because of the fact that he knows so much about the church and quite a bit about the Bible. However, recently it was proven to be a lie by Angela Davis, aka the Kitchenista, when the college responded that Darius Williams had in fact never attended their college. So this whole narrative that he created nearly 20 years, I think, ago, because I remember when I first heard it, and I'm like, I don't ever recall him going to college. So where is this coming from? And at the time, I just didn't know and wasn't trying to process it because it didn't really matter to me. But now I see that he started this lie, 20 years ago, and he just kept it going because no one was challenging him on any of this. And again, he knows so much about the church that he was able to fake it. So there's that. But like I said, nevertheless, he has been very good at playing church, at adapting certain characteristics of ministers and church protocol, things of that nature, to bond with his audience, to love bomb them to mimic, in a way, that of someone who is a pastor of a church. And his D-wives are his congregation and he's their minister. And even when I met Darius when he was just turning 20, he attended church every Sunday without fail and without prompting from anyone. He sung in a community choir 3 to 4 times a week at least, and he was a drill team coach at his church. From all accounts back then, Darius was an honor roll high school student, and a mutual friend who attended high school with Darius stated that pretty much either people loved Darius or they hated him. And that's because Darius's personality is definitely big and no one can deny that. And either it plays well for him in situations or it actually works against him because he doesn't necessarily know how to rein it in to allow other people to have shine. So if the shine isn't on him, if the attention isn't on him, he doesn't really know how to deal with that. And that's the thing that gets him in trouble when he gets around other people who are talented or gifted or the leader in that particular situation. But on his social media platforms, that's a non-issue because he's always the star of the show. And so his followers rarely get to see that piece of him that doesn't deal well with not having the attention on him. And trust me, I know from experience, Darius can be extremely obnoxious and an extremely abrasive and dismissive person at times. So then we get into, how do I come into this picture? Who am I? Why am I? Why am I speaking? That's because I definitely had a significant role in the life of Darius in the earlier years and in the very inception of his social media influencer start, the foundation of it. I was around. So I'm going to share some of the details of who Darius is from an intimate perspective that many people, well, probably more now, but I would say many people don't have, except for those boys he pays for. Let me stop. But anyway, and those are not relationships. Those are situationships. I had a relationship with him. So long story short, with this, I'm going to keep it cute as long as he continues to keep it cute. Because I got so much more I can talk about, but I will not. So anyway, let's get into it. So Darius and I actually met on what's called a party line in about 2001 or 2002. I think it was like later part of 2001, maybe. I'm not sure. Anyway, this was basically before online dating. Well, this was definitely before online dating. And so you would basically get on the phone and you would listen to messages of people. And it was almost like listening to outgoing voicemail messages, and people would describe themselves and say what they're interested in or who they're looking for, what they're, interested in doing, et cetera, et cetera. And then you would leave that person a message. If they were interested and you were interested, you could hit a button and the two of you would connect to speak to each other live over the phone. And so that's how Darius and I met. And basically during that time with that format, all you could go on was how they described themselves. And so you had to use that as your gauge of whether or not you wanted to not only connect with them to talk live, but also if you really wanted to meet them. So based on what Darius described, I was like, okay, we can meet. And generally from experience with that situation, there was always things people left out. Rarely were people as accurate with their description of themselves. It was kind of like, hit or miss with it. And for me back then, because I was not out, that was the way that I met people. I didn't go to clubs. I wasn't into clubs. And even still to this day, I've never really been a club person. Yes, I've gone, but it's just not my thing. And at this point, I don't care if I never step into a club for the rest of my life. Just give me a chill supper club-like vibe with some great music and some great drinks, and I'm in heaven. That's all I need. Okay, but enough about the old man that I've become. Let's get back to the early 2000s when I met Darius and I was still young and pulling them in. So this was really my only way to meet other gay guys. Now, as I was starting to reminisce, to come up with this whole first video of the series to kind of give you guys the foundation of all of this before we get into the real stuff, I really started to, things started to come back to me. I started to really reminisce and actually remember things about the first night that we met. I remember talking to him on that party line and really feeling the vibe. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we met that same night or at least that next day. It was like very immediate that we met. When we met, I lived on the other side of town, about 35 minutes away from where Darius lived. And so he drove to my house to meet, which for me already added a plus in his column because it was actually harder than you might think to actually find a gay guy who actually had a car back then. And actually even now. And we're not in New York.
What's going on?
I'm really out here confused.
But I remember when I opened the door, one of the first things I noticed was his height. He's 6'4", and I'm tall too. So for me, that was another plus in his column. Like, I noticed that right away. But my second thought I remember having was, damn, this dude ain't my type. He was definitely way bigger than anyone I had dated before or even since then. However, I was definitely, and still am, a nice person where I don't like to hurt people's feelings, especially to their face. So I wasn't the type to just like turn people around if I wasn't interested right away. Generally, there was some times where it was just like, okay, you lied about everything, there's no point. Like, you described something that I am not looking at. So, but in his case, it was just like, he left out some things. So I didn't turn him away. He ended up coming in. We sat in my living room and we continued to converse about various topics. And pretty much because the conversation was so good, as we continued to converse, I started to notice things on him that I did find attractive. He had some of the cutest features to me back then. His skin complexion was always clear. Like, he really never had bad skin. I barely remember him even having acne on any level. And even coming right out of his teens, he really had just really good skin. And for me, I really loved his smile, which even then, before the fake teeth he has now, I thought he had a nice smile. His teeth were nice and white. They were little now that I see the big ones he has. But I liked it back then. They were fine for me. I didn't see an issue with his teeth. But obviously he did, and that's why he spent thousands to replace them. So it was kind of like a gradual thing through the conversation where all of a sudden he was attractive to me. Like, I just found things on him and put them together and I was like, he's cute. Like, I could work with this. And then for me, because looks aren't everything, obviously, if you can see who I dated, and that's no slight on him. Like, I've dated other people that would not typically be considered, attractive to the masses. And I would say this is honestly the main thing about him that hooked me, was the fact that he was extremely mature, or so I thought. He was very mature and wise for his age. At the age of 20, he already had his own vehicle and he had his own apartment. Plus, back then and even now, I am still a sucker for a brain. And the more we talked, the more I realized how intelligent and unique he was. So I went from being disappointed when I first opened my door to not being able to wait until the next time that I saw him or talked to him. And that wasn't long. Oh, and that reminds me, I see a lot of comments now about him, his nasal issues with snorting and rubbing his nose and things like that. And I will say, because he's said it on his lives, that like he's always had nasal issues. He honestly had them even back then. That's another truth. Maybe I'll do a tally of the truths versus the untruths. One list is way longer than the other, I tell you that. But that's one thing that is true. He had those issues back then. I will say I didn't notice it. I don't know. It's kind of like, I guess, once you know a person, you become blind to some things. I can just honestly say, although I knew about it, it just wasn't annoying. And I didn't notice it as much as I'm noticing it now because everyone's pointing it out. But I'll say, I guess I just got used to it. But that is true. That is something. And I don't know, it's kind of an inside thing for me to hear people complain about something that just, I don't know, I was used to. So again, back to the early 2000s. From the moment we met in person, we talked every day. We'd be on the phone for hours. We saw each other multiple times a week, including sleepovers. Darius wanted me to go everywhere with him. And basically within the first 2 weeks, I had met all of his close friends, a few of his family members, pretty much anyone who was important to him. And when I met those people, everyone would be telling me how Darius was bragging about me and basically how head over heels he was for me. Plus, it didn't help that I told y'all back then I was, cute and pulling them in. So I was a little bit of arm candy. So, that was a pro in my column for him as well. Nevertheless, things were moving pretty fast and furious for us. And back then, when I liked someone, I would jump in, with both feet. And he definitely was that type. Even after me, like people he dated after me, he was definitely that type. I don't know about today. He seems very bitter, but definitely back then he jumped in with both feet as well. However, also like I've seen a pattern with other people that he dated, within about a month and a half, the honeymoon was over for Darius. And that's when I saw the first red flag with him that unfortunately I ignored. As I stated at that point, we spoke every day, multiple times a day. And so we had a routine at that point. So one evening, I called him out of our routine and was unable to reach him for the entire evening, basically. And at a certain point, I could tell that he was ignoring my phone calls while on the other line. And I knew this because back then, back in the day, for those of you who are a little older, you may be familiar with PrimeCo. And I don't know if they were US Cellular at that point or not, but I think it was PrimeCo or US Cellular. At that time, they had a feature where if you were calling another user, if they were on the line, you would hear a beep on your side to let you know that they're on another call and just not clicking over. So it definitely told you when someone was ignoring you. And I know that feature pissed a lot of people off and probably broke up some relationships too. And no wonder that feature is gone. And because this was so odd for the month or so of behavior that I had been getting from Darius, something then clicked and told me, check the party line, which is where I met him. Cause you know what they say, how you get him is how you lose him. And wouldn't you know it, sure enough, I hear this fool's message on the party line, like he's basically looking for someone else. So I'm giving a disclaimer, don't judge me, cause remember, this was 20 years ago, I was young. It was one of my first couple relationships, and I had never had this done to me before. So don't judge me, cause some of y'all done this too, and probably still doing it. I ain't did it in 20 years. So I was getting so upset, mad, and hurt that this fool Darius was doing all of this to pull me into his literally entire life, like doing too much too soon and monopolizing my time to then turn around and try to cheat on me.
What was the reason? What was the reason? What was the reason?
And I know back then, the reason why I was really so pissed was because my mindset back then was, I don't care if you weren't ready for a relationship. Do you, and I'm gonna do me, but don't pull me in unnecessarily and then try to do me dirty. Like, we could have just been casual, you date, I date, whatever. That's cool. Like, that's still my mindset today. Just keep it real. So this part here is where some of you Judge Judys are gonna come for me. So because I couldn't get him to answer the phone so that I could express myself, I drove 35 minutes one way to his house on the other side of town so that I could ring his doorbell to get his attention to be able to express myself. And of course, he ignored me ringing his bell, but I wasn't done. Because his bedroom window was literally right off of the alley, I was able to drive around the block and see that his light was on and basically that he was at home. It wasn't like he wasn't at home. So eventually I was able to, because of course I'm calling and, you know, doing whatever I was doing. And so he then answers me finally, and then tells me I'm basically doing the most, I need to go home, etc., etc. And then something finally clicked me back into reality, and I realized that I had basically let this young dude take me out of my character, because I'm a few years older than him. So I checked myself during my 35-minute drive home, and I promised myself that I would never ever give my power away to anyone like that ever again. So I can officially say that I've never been a stalker since. But I've definitely had a few of them. And now looking back, that's probably where our story really should have ended. However, a few days later, Darius ends up reaching out and basically apologizing and explaining that things were basically going so good and so smooth that he got scared, blah, 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 whatever the excuse was. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the time that I had the conversation with his then BFF, who is now a dear friend of mine since, you know, Darius scammed him when he scammed me. I think this is the time that he and I had a conversation where he was trying to convince me to give Darius another chance and saying, you know, all these things of how Darius really felt about me, etc., etc. So for me, that conversation pretty much helped change the tide in the favor of Darius. And honestly, you know, the self-work that I've had to do over the years, still working on it to some degree, is back then I was attracted to and had a habit of trying to fix people. Like, they call it the broken bird syndrome, where it was like broken people were who I was attracted to because I could see a way for me to fit in and try to make their lives better in some kind of way. Yes, twisted. I know. I'm not like that anymore. Well, I'm not like that anymore. I'm a lot better with that. Because it brings you nothing but heartache. So longer story short, our relationship just kept going from that point on. And we were like besties and a couple at the same time during that next 2 years. As a partner, I rode with him through his ups and downs. Like during the first year of our relationship, The car he drove over to meet me at my house got repossessed. He was fired from multiple jobs, and he got evicted from more than one apartment. I remember one of his firings, which led also to an eviction, was, I think it was the second payroll company that he had worked for at that point. I remember when he attempted to start a payroll company while working for either like one of the top 3 payroll companies in the country. He decided that he was going to start his own payroll company, to which my question was, how's this going to affect your job? Isn't this a conflict of interest, et cetera, et cetera? And he pretty much promised me that he had it all figured out, blah, 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 this and that. And so I even remember being at his apartment in his room, and he was on the computer and he was working on the website and just building it all out. And I was kind of like, I don't think this is a good idea. But again, I was like, do your thing. This is you. Darius has always been headstrong, stubborn, all of that type of stuff. And so I had my own life. I had my own stuff. I was like, I don't live here. Like, he wasn't responsible for none of my bills. So it's kind of like, you know, let the cars fall where they may. So I left it alone and let him do his thing. But surprise, surprise, after just a few weeks, I don't even think it was a full month, his employer got wind of his new deluxe payroll company. And I vaguely remember kind of how it all went down, but if I'm not mistaken, it was Darius was trying to solicit one of their existing clients, and the client turned around and called the company and told them that Darius was trying to solicit them for his own company. And I really just remember at a point he was trying to like clean up online, removing evidence, I think shutting down the website or whatever, so that his employer wouldn't have any proof of what they were trying to accuse him of. But kind of like now, where he's trying to scrub the internet, or he has scrubbed it in the past, and I guess he didn't realize nothing ever disappears on the internet, even if you delete it. It was a similar situation to what we see today, where he tried to clean it all up from the payroll company existing, his fake payroll company existing, and by the time that he got wind that his employer was even questioning it, they had already done their research. So when he goes in the office for the meeting regarding this, thinking he was going to deny his way out of it, they already had all the evidence they needed, and they terminated him on the spot. And looking back, I think this is the first scam that he did on a public level, at least that I'm aware of. And honestly, although it's a red flag, some might look at it like, well, you saw that happening. Why didn't you know, the kind of person he was at that point? I think for me back then, because it was a white collar crime, so to speak, and it was done to a major corporation, I didn't really put a lot into it. I was just like, okay, he tried to be slick with something, it didn't work out. Who's harmed by it? I mean, it's a corporation that's probably harming people anyway. So I didn't equate it to his character as it pertained to everyday working people, which is the kind of predator he's become now. And I think because it's a lot easier, well, I know it's a lot easier to victimize individuals of regular means than large corporations. And maybe he learned that lesson back then. And I don't have to say allegedly, because there's proof of him in this company, and hell, I know it. I was around. And yeah, I think I just looked at him being overly ambitious. And then the other side of it, honestly, in full transparency about me, because I'm not perfect, is that during that time, I grew up as an only child. I grew up sheltered to a larger degree. And so I just wasn't street smart. And so this stuff kind of went over my head to a degree as far as being a red flag. And even at that time in my mid-20s, I just wasn't street smart like that. I wasn't savvy about all of that. And I was still learning. Now, I know a hell of a lot about all of that stuff, and know what to look out for. So yeah, that's why it all went down. And I didn't look at it as a red flag, like, get away from him. So nevertheless, he had lost his job at that point, and we were a real couple. And so I knew at that point I couldn't be like, damn, that's effed up, bro. What you gonna do? Like, I knew at that point I had to be a supportive boyfriend. And at that point he was being evicted. And I think it was fairly quickly thereafter, which tells me that he was already behind in rent. And then losing that job just was the icing on the cake, where he had no options to be able to mitigate and extend anything. And honestly, even with all of that going on back then, my thought was, damn, I wasn't trying to have a live-in boyfriend situation at all at that point. But Darius asked me if he could just stay with me for a couple weeks until he got on his feet again. And he basically promised that it wouldn't be long at all. And I agreed, while in my head thinking it's gonna definitely be a few months before he's able to get back on his feet. But he surprised the hell out of me. Literally within 2 to 3 weeks, Darius had not only a new job, but a new apartment, and he was ready to move out. And actually, that made me admire and fall for him even more back then. And one thing that I can say about him through all that he's been through with losing jobs, cars, and multiple apartments, Darius has always been a hard worker and never lazy. And he always hustled to get what he needed and wanted. However, looking back now, I now realize that there was likely some scamming going on to make those things happen as quickly as they did. And, you know, during his couple weeks stay with me was the first time that I can say I saw his insecurities about his weight surfacing. 90% of his main crew of people that he hung out with then, and even now from what I hear, 90% of them were obese. So they talked and joked about weight constantly. So that honestly misled me for quite a while, because at that time I thought because he joked so much about it that I honestly thought he embraced his size for the most part. But that was until he stayed with me. I want to say maybe on the first night he came to stay with me, he playfully jumped on my bed with all of his weight and broke my decorative wood frame rail that held the bed up, and my bed literally went crashing down to the floor. I honestly was very upset because I knew my bed was ruined, and it wasn't even that old. I think it was maybe a year or two old at that point. And I don't think I went too crazy because it's not really my MO. I don't really go into rages. But looking back, I think whatever I said in my initial reaction really hurt his feelings. And for me back then, it didn't really click how bad it affected him until he refused to lay in my bed again, and he only slept on my living room sofa for the entire time he stayed with me. And even with all of those situations and issues, he never stopped being enjoyable to be around for the most part, except I hated when I was around a certain group of his friends, because it was almost as if they fed the beast within him, the thing that caused him to be extremely obnoxious and literally the biggest asshole in public. Everything from being rude to wait staff, especially if they were of a different race, always being the loudest table in the restaurants we were in, and they loved having extremely inappropriate conversations in public settings, which now that I think about it is exactly what he does now on his IG lives. So he really hasn't changed in a lot of ways. He's still holding court in a group of people and doing the most. The only difference is now on social media with his adoring D-wives, feeding the narcissist and the alleged sociopath within him. And that behavior literally got so bad that I told him that I would no longer hang out with him when he was around that group of people, because it was like they fed something to him that just brought out the ugliest parts in him all the time. So from then on, if he invited me places and they were going, I'd say, have fun and I'll see you when you get back. At that point, I even had my own set of keys to his apartment, and I would pretty much go over there and hang out until he came back from whatever outing or event he was at with those friends. And now looking back, I'm also noticing something I noticed back then but didn't correlate to today until recently, where even back then, Darius would mimic his friends and take on parts of their characteristics, vernacular, and their jokes. And because I was with him so much in different settings with different groups of his friends, different social settings, etc., I would notice him repeating jokes and showing certain characteristics that I knew weren't authentic to him in these different social settings with new people, when all the while I knew the original sources of this character that he would portray to other people, and these funny jokes that people were thinking, oh, Darius, you're so hilarious. It's like, no, oh, Darius, you're good at repeating other people's jokes and taking them on as your own. So now looking at where we are today with people saying, you know, he's taken on things from other chefs, everything from recipes, and people want to minimize that. And I get on some level some of the argument with it, but at the core of what people are talking about with it is not the idea of taking someone's idea and putting your touch on it. It's the fact that Darius takes on other people's persona, intellectual property, etc., treats it as if it's his own original thought to his audience and then profits off of it. That's a huge difference from you or I making a recipe we see on YouTube or in a recipe book. Totally different. We are not creating companies based on those recipes and then profiting from them and not giving the original creator their credit, their due, or their compensation. And Darius typically does this to people his audience aren't familiar with, so they don't necessarily know the original source. However, he has slipped up recently multiple times in even taking on Tabitha Brown's persona, who is very well known and more well known than he is, and he gets called out for those sort of things. So it's a part of his character. It's a part of, he's always been like that. I did not take it seriously, like, you know, the D-Wives, they don't take it seriously, like, oh, we all do that. To a degree, yes, we all do, but we don't create our whole persona off of it. And that's the difference. And again, this was something that I overlooked. It's a red flag when you start to realize that someone doesn't truly have their own identity. They create their identity based on basically a hodgepodge stew of other people's ideas, personas, personalities, vernacular, etc. And then they take that stew and that's who they present themselves to be. That is what we're talking about here. And that's a problem, because if you don't know who you are, how are we gonna ever know who you really are? That's how I'm looking at it now. And even with all of that, looking back, with only knowing what I knew back then, not what I know today, I honestly think that we would have definitely made it longer in a relationship had I not ended it when I did. However, where things really took a turn was when Darius pulled us into a business venture with him. Like, contracts mean nothing for Darius, so contracts mean nothing to him. Darius, at a certain point, he stole all the money out of the accounts, closed the accounts, all kind of craziness, forged our signatures, everything to make all this happen. That was pretty much the demise of our friendship. Now, there are gonna be people who say, well, why are you doing all this? Why didn't you just sue him? Now, for the slow people in the back of the room, trying to sue someone doesn't mean that you're gonna get anywhere with it. And so we did do that because he understands the difficulty in suing someone and that most people aren't going to want to go through those motions because of the petty amounts that he usually steals from individuals. So with us at that point, we had nearly $20,000 invested. And what the attorney told us is that he knows that we would win. That wouldn't be a problem. He said the issue is the person you're dealing with. And he stated this person has already filed for bankruptcy. He stated that he obviously doesn't have money based on, you know, what he's doing, but he steals now and he has a little money. But longer story short, he said that you can go through all of this if it's for principle, but the truth is, even when we won, there was no guarantee that we would get our money back, and most likely we wouldn't.
Hey, popping like I'm supposed to. Watch out for the people that ain't close to. Speak a little something you could toast to. I ain't tryna hear about what you won't do.